Hello again. I cannot help but notice that an awful lot of anti-racists, especially the more academic ones, who are, as you might say, professionals in the field, tend to do two things which cause me to raise my eyebrows. One is deliberately telling awful lies, and the other, which is much worse, is to use the dreadful methods of racism to advance their cause. Um, as far as telling lies go, I suppose most people that are passionate about some political belief or religion do tend to tell lies if they think it will enhance their own particular cause. So perhaps I shouldn't criticise anti-racists quite that much for this particular technique. But I'll just give a couple of examples. I mentioned this book a few days ago, which gave us some classic examples of how lies are told in the cause of anti-racism. The author is a professor of sociology and the book is published by the Oxford University Press. But, of course, the very first sentence on page 1 is a lie. The term racism was coined in the 1930s primarily as a response to the Nazi project of making Germany Judenrein, or free of Jews. That's completely false, of course. It was actually coined by an American more than 30 years before then. Okay, it goes on to claim that the idea that Jews were a distinct race was given currency by Nazi racial science. Well, that's also quite false. As early as 1844, future British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, who himself was of course a Jew, wrote in his novel Coningsby, "The Jews, for example, independently of the capital qualities for citizenship which they possess in their industry, temperance, and energy and vivacity of mind, are a race essentially monarchical and deeply religious." I'm pretty sure that Disraeli was not a Nazi. What about using racist methods to promote anti-racism? Before I give the specific instance which I have in mind today, let me just mention a couple of ways that racist techniques and pseudoscience have crept back. One is the use of quotas at universities to limit the admission of certain minorities. At one time, many universities in Europe and the United States operated quotas to restrict the number of Jews which they admitted. This was terrible. Places like Harvard and Yale, though, they are now using quotas to limit the number of people of East Asian origin. And it's exactly the same thing. They do this to ensure racial balancing so that 15% of their intake can be African American. The only way that this can be done is by preventing well-qualified Chinese applicants and allowing instead poorly qualified black people in. In other words, in the interests of anti-racism and a fair society, these colleges are limiting the number of ethnic minorities, which is every bit as bad as the Jewish quotas which existed before the Second World War. Then there's the question of anthropometry, which is just essentially the measurement of bits of the body in an attempt to prove that people of different ethnicities have different shaped skulls or different sized noses and stuff like that. It used to be thought that one could establish the ethnicity of somebody by measuring their skull or the length of their nose. The Nazis were very keen on this and had an entire ministry which was devoted to identifying Jews in this way. This is not science, obviously. Lately, though, skulls found in Britain which date back hundreds of years have been subjected to the same kind of unscientific analysis and declared to belong to Africans, thus proving that Britain was always a multicultural society. One thinks of the so-called ivory bangle lady in York, the beachy head woman on the south coast of England. These are claimed to be black people on the grounds of Nazi pseudoscience, which is exceedingly regrettable. I was thinking today, though, about the old one-drop rule, which used to be popular in America and actually found its way into legislation in a number of southern states in the 20th century. The idea was that a single black ancestor, just one drop of black blood was enough to cause a person to be classified as being black themselves. This would, of course, result in me being declared black from my own grandmother was of mixed heritage. I'm what would have been described in Jamaica, for instance, as an octoroon. In 1910, Tennessee passed a law which placed the one-drop rule on a legal footing, defining as black anybody with any black ancestry whatsoever. Other legislatures in the South followed suit, including Louisiana, Texas, North Carolina, Mississippi, Virginia, and, as late as 1927, Alabama and Georgia. It's shocking enough to find that less than a century ago American states were passing such laws, but to find that dedicated anti-racists are now following the same principles in their efforts to distort history is almost as bad. I give a reference in the description to this video about the one-drop rule. I give a book which you can consult on this, which gives detail of the legislation I mentioned. It may seem inconceivable that this madness would be used by anybody in the modern world, let alone by anti-racists, but such is the case. It will be remembered that the Netflix historical drama series Bridgerton cast a black woman as Queen Charlotte. The theory behind this mad belief can be summed up very simply. Queen Charlotte, or Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz as she was at birth, was born in 1744 to a noble family, part of whose ancestry was Portuguese. A very distant ancestor of Charlotte was Afonso III, who was born in 1210 AD and ruled Portugal until his death in 1279. Afonso had a mistress called Madrigana ben Alejandro. She had 2 children by him, and one of these children was also an ancestor of Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. It's possible, but by no means certain, that Madrigana was from North Africa, which is to say she might have been an Arab or even possibly a black woman from sub-Saharan Africa. It is upon this shaky and slender foundation that the British newspaper The Guardian published an article about Queen Charlotte on 12th of March 2009 with the headline, "Was this Britain's first black queen?" Perhaps we might pause at this point and consider this madness. Readers are invited to imagine that 500 years ago, roughly at the time that the English king Henry VIII was marrying Anne Boleyn in 1533, one of their very remote ancestors had an affair with somebody from Africa. Does anybody seriously imagine that this would have the effect of making a man or woman born 5 centuries later in the 21st century, in any conceivable sense, black? Seriously? No? 500 years separate Queen Charlotte from her possibly African ancestor, and so the case is precisely similar. Yet it is fast becoming almost an accepted fact that Charlotte was in some completely bizarre way Britain's first black queen. Hence the black actress being chosen to play the role in Bridgerton. We see newspaper articles referring to Britain's first black queen, and among black people in the United States, this is amongst many black people, I should say, of course not all black people, this is now an accepted fact. Welcome to the wonderful world of modern anti-racism, where the racial practices and customs of the antebellum Deep South are alive and well.